This is Russia, the largest country on Earth, with an area exceeding 17 million square kilometers. This means its size is almost equal to the entire continent of South America. If we compare its area to the second largest country in the world, Canada, we'll find that Russia is almost double Canada's size. Russia is so vast that it has 11 time zones. This means if it's 10 p.m. in the east, it's 8 a.m. in the west. It also shares borders with countries very far apart, like Norway and North Korea. So, Russia is not just big. Russia is very, very big. This is the Russia that you, I, and all of us probably know. But there's another side to Russia that no one knows about and no one talks about. That is, Russia is not just one country. Russia consists of 22 countries within its borders. These countries are completely different from each other, different in appearance, religion, language, customs, and general lifestyle. They are literally completely distinct peoples. All these peoples live in Russia in their own special places, and these places are independent republics within Russia. There are 22 such republics, and each one of them is considered almost a state within a state. Each has its own president, constitution, flag, and national anthem. The largest among them is the Republic of Yakutia, located in the far east of Russia. This republic has a vast area exceeding 3 million square kilometers. Consequently, if considered a country, it would be the 8th largest country on Earth, surpassing Algeria, the largest Arab country. Yakutia is home to approximately 1 million people, about half of whom are Turkic Yakuts, and about 38% are Russians. The prevalent language among the population is Yakut, in addition to Russian. The people of Yakutia are mostly Christian, but some follow paganism. The capital of Yakutia and its largest city is Yakutsk, a city where almost everything freezes except humans. The average temperature here throughout the year is 8 degrees below 0 Celsius, and in winter, temperatures can drop to 60 degrees below zero. This literally makes the city the coldest major city on Earth. That's why people in markets don't need refrigerators or any storage methods, because certainly 60 degrees below zero will be enough to preserve meat and fish throughout the winter. After winter ends, the residents gather and hold a big celebration, celebrating the return of nature, the triumph of life, and the beginning of a new year in the Republic of Yakutia. If we leave Yakutia and head west, we'll find ourselves in the most populous republic, the Republic of Bashkortostan, home to approximately 4 million people. Although Christianity is prevalent in most parts of Russia, the majority of the population here are Muslims, and almost all of them speak Russian in addition to the Bashkir language. Bashkortostan is one of Russia's richest regions because it produces more oil than any other area, providing Russia with approximately 17% of its gasoline and 15% of its diesel fuel. Roughly a third of the republic's area is covered in forests, and it has over 13,000 rivers, making it one of the most beautiful regions in all of Russia. Moreover, it's famous for its bee farms that produce Bashkir honey, considered one of the finest types of honey in Russia and the entire world. In the European part of Russia lies the Republic of Kalmykia, which is arguably the strangest republic in Russia. It's home to the Kalmyk people, whose origins trace back to the Mongols, and they speak a Mongolic language called Kalmyk, in addition to Russian, of course. The Kalmyk people are the only people in Europe who practice Buddhism. That's why you'll find Buddhist temples and symbols almost everywhere. You'll literally feel like you've crossed European borders and traveled to an Asian country. Kalmykia is known as the Chess Republic because chess is a compulsory subject taught to children in schools here. Consequently, almost the entire population is professional at chess. If we leave Kalmykia and head south, we'll find ourselves in a completely different place, the Republic of Dagestan, which extends along the Caspian Sea coast. Dagestan is the most diverse republic in Russia, home to over 30 ethnicities, 81 nationalities, and 14 official languages, though Russian is the common language spoken by all residents. The population in Dagestan reaches about 3.2 million people, and approximately 90% of them are Muslims. Dagestan is known as the land of mountains, with 6,000 rivers, and is generally considered one of Russia's warmer regions. The capital and largest city of the republic is Makhachkala, which is Dagestan's political and commercial center. The city is located between the mountains and the sea and is home to the Grand Mosque, considered one of the largest mosques in Europe, accommodating approximately 17,000 worshippers. Football has great popularity in the city thanks to the Anzhi Makhachkala club. The club was known as Russian Manchester City and included major stars like Brazilian legend Roberto Carlos and Cameroonian star Samuel Eto'o, who, during his time at the club, was the highest paid player in the world. The club participated in the Russian Premier League and the UEFA Europa League and reached the final of the Russian Cup, but it was ultimately dissolved and disappeared completely in 2022. Currently, the city's main team is Dynamo Makhachkala, which plays in the Russian league at Dynamo Stadium. In addition to football, combat sports are the most popular in Dagestan, and one of its most important stars is Khabib Nurmagomedov. West of the Republic of Dagestan lies Russia's most famous republic, the Republic of Chechnya. Chechnya is home to approximately 1.5 million people, most of whom speak Chechen in addition to Russian. The prevalent religion in Chechnya is Islam, practiced by almost 95% of the population, which is why mosques are found almost everywhere. The president of the Chechen Republic is Ramzan Kadyrov, who has governed the republic for about 20 years and is considered the richest and most powerful man in all of Chechnya. Ramzan Kadyrov presents himself as a religious figure and political leader, but at the same time, he is accused of assassinating opponents. Kadyrov possesses a large militia known as the Akhmat Forces, which comprises about 10,000 soldiers, and is currently participating in Russia's war on Ukraine. Ramzan Kadyrov has transformed Chechnya from a state in constant conflict with Russia into a republic whose primary loyalty is to Moscow, to the extent that he has become known in the media as Putin's pampered boy. That's why almost all of Chechnya's streets feature pictures of Putin with Ramzan Kadyrov. But the question that arises is, how did Russia incorporate all these different countries and peoples within its borders? And how did Russia acquire all this vast area in the first place? To understand how this happened, we need to go back in time about 1,000 years. At that time, Russia controlled the area you see before you, the land known as Kievan Rus, which was experiencing a period of economic progress and expanded significantly in Eastern Europe for nearly 3 centuries. Then the Mongols began to expand in Asia and approach the lands of Kievan Rus until they finally succeeded in destroying and occupying it in the 13th century. Here, the Mongols forced the surviving Russians to pledge complete loyalty and pay taxes, effectively turning the Russians into servants of the Mongols. At that time, only one city had the ability to fight the Mongols, the city of Muscovy, or Moscow. This city was surrounded by forests and rivers that made it much harder for the Mongols to reach than any other region or city. This kept the city relatively safe from Mongol attacks, as the Mongols were terrifying at that time, literally burning and destroying any place they entered. If we look at the map of the Mongol Empire at that time, we'll see it possessed a vast area. The area you see before you is the largest contiguous area held by an empire throughout history. But controlling and ruling an empire of this immense size for long periods is an almost impossible task. That's why the Mongol Empire began to weaken and suffer from significant divisions. Moscow seized this opportunity and began to expand, until they finally succeeded in expelling the Mongols after an occupation that lasted about 250 years. Here, Moscow decided to expand further eastward, eventually transforming into the Russian Empire. After expanding in Eastern Europe, the Russians liked the idea and decided to continue expanding eastward. Here, the Russians found themselves in a very large region, almost entirely covered in ice. This region is Siberia. Siberia is a vast area with a very small population, which made controlling it a very easy task. as the people living here, who were not many to begin with, had no ability to defend their land. But what made these lands very important for Russia were the animals found there, whose fur was very valuable. Consequently, controlling these lands would allow Russia to control the fur trade, which was a very lucrative business at the time. That's why Russia decided to continue expanding and annexing more land until it succeeded in controlling almost all of Siberia and finally reached the Pacific Ocean. Here, Russia transformed into a vast empire stretching from Europe to Asia, which made it one of the most important powers on Earth at that time. At the beginning of the 20th century, the Russian Empire began to weaken significantly, and divisions and protests started occurring throughout Russia. Eventually, the Russian Empire collapsed, and the era of the Soviet Union began in 1922. Vladimir Lenin seized power in October 1917. At that time, Russia entered a civil war that lasted for years and claimed millions of lives. Here, the oppressed minorities and peoples in Russia began establishing independent republics. With the establishment of the Soviet Union, there were two types of republics. The republics that formed the Soviet Union, the largest of which was Russia, and the independent republics located within the republics that formed the Soviet Union, most of which were inside Russia. The Soviet Union, in its early period under Lenin, strongly supported these republics and encouraged minorities to join their republican governments and use their own languages. Here, their conditions began to improve significantly for about 10 years. But with the rise of Joseph Stalin to power, the conditions of these peoples gradually began to change. Initially, Stalin continued to support minority independence, but then the situation changed completely, marking a period of minority marginalization and support for everything Russian. Here, these minorities were excluded from government, and millions of people were forcibly displaced. Russian became mandatory in all areas inhabited by minorities. After the collapse of the Soviet Union in 1991, the republics that formed the Soviet Union had the right to secede, but the smaller independent republics did not have the same right. At that time, Russia was at its weakest, and minorities constituted almost 20% of Russia's population. Here, fears arose that these republics might declare their independence from Russia. That's why Russian President Boris Yeltsin supported the independence of these republics and asked them to take the sovereignty they desired. He made agreements with them for power sharing and joining the Federation. Here, these republics gained greater authority and almost complete control over their natural resources and economic policies. However, after Putin's rise to power, the situation for these republics began to change completely. Putin came to power in 2000. Here, Putin began to modify the political system in Russia and started concentrating power more in Moscow, successfully gaining almost complete control over political and economic decisions. From that time on, these republics gradually began to lose their independence, despite their de facto existence.